That is not my mother, no. Your mother. That is quite amusing, he remarked to the woman. And I thought, I really hope that's a review. Their on-screen connection, charisma, and humor made them look like the ideal romantic pair. Something even more tragic, nevertheless, was transpiring behind the scenes of Bewitched. Elizabeth Montgomery never mentioned Dick York again, and he mysteriously disappeared from the show. The truth remained a mystery to admirers for decades. Why did she simply refuse to collaborate with him in the future? Where did the immovable wedge come from? The truth has come to light after a long time, and it is more tragic than anybody could have imagined. When Bewitched premiered on television for the first time in 1964, it was revolutionary. Just the thought of a lovely suburban witch betraying her mortal husband by burying her abilities was enticing. The connection between show stars Dick York and Elizabeth Montgomery, nevertheless, was the showstopper. A Hollywood celebrity on the rise, Elizabeth Montgomery was already well on her way. She was famous for playing complex, intelligent, and slightly mystifying female roles. Her father, the late Robert Montgomery, was a film icon. Audiences fell head over heels for her portrayal of Samantha Stevens the moment she accepted the job. However, Dick York was a well-respected character actor who had already established himself in the theater, radio, and several television shows. His performance of Darren Stevens was unforgettable because of his subtle comic timing, powerful charisma, and quick wit. Despite his reactions to Samantha's ridiculous magical blunders, York exuded an approachable warmth and an everyman charm that made him likable right away. The early stages of Bewitched were a hopeful and carefree time behind the scenes. It was instant chemistry between York and Montgomery. They had no romantic connection. Their on-set teasing was genuine, despite the fact that Montgomery was married to producer William Asher. Their co-stars reminisced about how they would easily bounce ideas off of each other and joke together in between takes. Their cadence, which was unspoken but seen on television, was captivating. Bewitched enjoyed tremendous popularity in its early seasons. It maintained a high position in the ratings time and time again. York and Montgomery were both lauded by critics for their performances. Samantha's mild humor and Darren's irate responses came naturally. But the enchantment of a film or TV show is rarely permanent. Things started to change behind the scenes even as the cameras recorded humorous, carefree moments. Something was going on behind the scenes, a subtle tension that initially went unnoticed by most. On screen, Dick York's grin never wavered. However, he was actually being held down by something more heavier. Even though she was friendly in public, Elizabeth Montgomery was not the type to readily accept weakness. Dick York had been fighting a ghost that followed him about like a shadow long before he ever stepped foot on the Bewitched set. His life took a dramatic turn in 1959 on set of the Western play They Came to Cordura. A physically hard sequence saw York and multiple people operating a handcar, which is used to manually push rail lines. The crew member who had been holding the hefty metal handle slipped and sent a jolt of force crashing into York's spine. "It was like an explosion inside my back," he said afterwards. A ripped muscle along his spine was the immediate injury, but the effects would last a lifetime. York persisted in her efforts rather than seek out long-term treatment or take a break. Actors were supposed to grit their teeth through persistent discomfort back then. He became mired in a vicious cycle of self-medication, chiropractic adjustments, and determination. He had already been living a precarious life, silently coping with his suffering, when he was cast in Bewitched a few years later. That delicate balancing act, however, would quickly become untenable due to the demands of a popular television program. At first, nobody paid any attention. Even though his back was in excruciating pain, York had a remarkable talent at appearing cheery and witty. After filming scenes with boundless enthusiasm and a sense of humor, he would slump into a chair, drenched in perspiration, during the breaks. Stagehands started storing foldable cots close by for him to use as a bed in between acts. He was asked to walk around less in the scripts. The directors skillfully adjusted the camera to conceal York's habit of repeatedly leaning against furniture for support. In an early attempt to accommodate him, the production crew, headed by William Asher, Montgomery's husband, made an effort. The filming schedule was rearranged, he was given time to recuperate, and they supported him in taking whatever necessary assistance. Television, however, runs at a breakneck pace, and under duress, the virtue of patience becomes rare. York's days off started to add up. On sometimes, he was just too ill to come in. There were instances when he got there but couldn't stay for the entire scene. Despite everything, York remained incredibly kind. Even though the pain was excruciating, he was nonetheless polite to everyone on set and didn't complain. However, others, notably Elizabeth Montgomery, started to tire of his battle. She seemed sympathetic initially, but her tone allegedly shifted toward the end of season 4. Reports from various crew members indicate that she started to avoid York. Their once fun dynamic became serious. Some claim that her frustration stemmed from the frequent alterations to her schedule. Some think she was trying to deflect attention from the other actors on the show by bringing York's illness to the forefront. She appeared to be losing her patience, for whatever reason. The mood on set became progressively chilly as York's body began to give out more frequently. While that was tragic in and of itself, it was only the beginning of a much deeper schism in vintage television. Discord behind the scenes began to escalate during Bewitched's 4th season. A once supportive work atmosphere was now fraught with tension. Day after day, on set became an emotional and physical struggle for Dick York. No amount of Hollywood magic could alleviate the simmering resentment caused by his failing health, the incessant filming schedule, and the pressure to perform. York could no longer feel Elizabeth Montgomery's warmth and engagement. She had grown notably distant. She had a long history of maintaining the show's seamless operation with her professionalism, attention, drive, and determination. However, many familiar with the production noted that she changed her tone. She seldom smiled or joked with York between takes, preferring instead to keep to herself. Some thought it was her coping mechanism, a means of emotionally distancing herself from the charmed set's daily anarchy. Not everyone was as kind. According to urban legend, Montgomery had been more agitated by York's frequent absences and difficulties initially. Some said that the continual rewrites and reshoots made her feel stifled. William Asher, who is both her husband and the executive producer of the show, also had an impact. Asher allegedly had many disagreements with York due to his no-nonsense attitude. Maintaining a tight, efficient, and lucrative show was his primary objective. But York's erratic health was starting to derail his plans. According to one of York's former co-workers, the actor once requested a brief break before filming a particularly difficult sequence because he was visibly fatigued and in pain. It was said that Asher scowled and stormed off set. Things like that communicated a lot. York had a limited amount of time left on the show. Montgomery kept her criticisms to herself, but her quiet was powerful. Less personal interactions occurred, and the early days' sense of camaraderie was noticeably absent. Their relationship had cooled down off camera, even though they shared sequences on camera. Despite York's sincere performances, in which she frequently endured excruciating pain, the atmosphere remained charged with tension. It was that thick between takes on certain days. York persisted on showing up anyhow, frequently against medical professionals' orders. Though he remained committed to the part in the show, he had lost his carefree, energetic co-star from the pilot. He was transformed by the agony. His expression and movements betrayed the stress he was under on TV, and how seldom he now grinned in real life. Elizabeth had also changed due to the stress of her marriage to the show's boss and the demands of her high-pressure production. Something distant, professional, and guarded has replaced their once warm and fuzzy bond. And then there was the turning point when that expanding gap became something permanent. While filming season 5, something happened that changed everything. For months, Dick York's life had been precariously balanced, making it to the set despite his limited mobility. Sometime in 1969, his health just couldn't take it anymore. It was just a routine sequence that they were recording in front of the whole team and cast. As Darren Stevens, York was standing on the kitchen set when all of a sudden he became pale and began to shake. Then, out of nowhere, he fell to the floor. They hurried in the crew. There was a halt to production. The studio fell into utter quietness for an instant. After that, he was taken to the hospital in a hurry. He departed from the Bewitched set without ever returning. Official remarks lacked specificity. There was more to the story than just health concerns, which the studio used as an excuse. York claims that he wanted to return. Subsequently, he said that he had pleaded with the producers to give him a few weeks off so he could heal, asserting his ability to complete the season. Even though the call never arrived. Instead, Dick Sargent was cast by the studio to play Darren Stevens a few days later. This drastically altered portrayal of the character, which a large number of viewers were never able to get behind. The alteration was not clarified visually. Not a goodbye episode. As if he had never been a part of the show, York vanished. The quiet was more painful than the abrupt replacement. There was no communication from Elizabeth Montgomery. Not a single visit, letter, or note. They worked together for 5 years before silently ending their partnership. Many thought the program could finally move on once William Asher decided to replace York. Others, though, perceived a more profound meaning in Montgomery's muteness. Was it annoyance, shame, or apathy? No one has ever been able to say for sure. There was not a single occasion when she addressed York's departure in public. The abrupt turndown proved catastrophic for Dick York. He had poured his heart and soul into the character, even if it had cost him dearly at times. Finally, it wasn't sufficient to warrant a farewell. Lots of talking went on behind closed doors. York received individual expressions of sympathy from a few castmates. A few others murmured that they were happy to have someone with more physical reliability filling the position. The message was crystal apparent, though, regardless of their thoughts. It was forbidden to mention the fact that York had departed. The supporters were startled by the change. This was a personal tragedy for York, though. He had been demoted from the position he cherished. Estranged from a co-star he had profoundly admired, perhaps even loved, and abandoned by the people he had once referred to as colleagues. Elizabeth Montgomery's continued silence would become increasingly agonizing over time. Not only did the press and producers remain mute following Dick York's abrupt exit from Bewitched, but Elizabeth Montgomery herself remained silent. A dynamic, albeit tense, working relationship came to an end without resolution. York would subsequently claim that she never even sent him a note, let alone a phone call or a kind word. The stillness lasted for quite some time. It persisted throughout their entire lives. York attempted some optimism at first. Years later, in interviews, he continued to speak highly of Montgomery. He spoke highly of her professionalism, charisma, and talent. He refrained from openly criticizing her. In response to a question on the end of their relationship, he was still cautious with his comments. "She went her own way and I went mine," he once said. However, an enduring melancholy lay beneath those remarks. On a more personal level, things were different. York tried to reach out, and he confided in close friends about it. In an effort to set the record straight, he mailed a letter, or perhaps more than one. His message was unreturned. Those closest to him said that out of all the hours they had spent working together on set, the silence hurt the most. There appeared to be zero desire on her side to resolve their differences, despite the abundance of humor and camaraderie in the initial seasons. The reasons for Montgomery's decision to stay silent are still not fully understood. Many believe she did it out of devotion to her late husband William Asher, who supposedly became sick of dealing with York's health problems. Other people think she might have hated how York's illness detracted from the show's flow, and that maybe she thought he was more bother than he was worth. Others ask whether there was a more intimate dimension to the problem. It was said, but never proven, that in the early years of filming, York had developed genuine affections for Montgomery. While she was married and determined to follow her own path, rumors circulated that his feelings for her extended beyond friendship. After he was no longer involved in the production, she wanted to put some space between them, which may be explained by an emotional distance. No matter what led to it, the outcome was obvious. Despite his pain and subsequent departure, York never again collaborated with her or had any communication with her. Still, it's remarkable that he never showed signs of resentment. Maintaining an air of respect while discussing Montgomery was something he did right up until the end. Despite the passage of time, Elizabeth's quiet continued to ring truer than any outcry. Although York remained out of the limelight for the most part, the truth about what transpired between them became increasingly convoluted as time went on. Dick York was never cast in another major role after Bewitched. Hollywood has a knack for ignoring actors who are unable to continue performing, particularly those coping with chronic health conditions. The injury that had plagued York for so long became even more excruciating. Tragically, he lost a job and had no one to lean on in times of need. His acting career was nearly over by the mid-1970s. No longer were offers being made since the physical pain was too much to bear. He wed Joan in 1952, and they lived a life of relative obscurity together. Despite his incapacity to walk, she never left his side and would even physically carry him. Their connection provided him with stability in a world that had abandoned him. The burden on the budget was substantial. York and his wife were formerly scraping by on very little residuals and disability payments. On occasion, they had to decide between buying groceries and paying for medical care. Though he never harbored any animosity, he did characterize those years as humiliating. Certainly not in the direction of Elizabeth Montgomery, not even toward Bewitched or Hollywood. Actually, York continued to address her kindly even if they remained silent. He expressed his desire that Montgomery would remember him kindly and praised her as a beautiful woman in one of his last interviews. Never once did he strike back or attempted to discredit her, even when confronted with questions regarding their breakup. However, in his last years, Dick York's legacy changed in a spectacular way. Despite spending most of the 1980s and 1990s bedridden, he made the most of his limited energies to create an impact. He established the nonprofit Acting for Life to aid the homeless. He rallied support, coordinated gifts, and made phone calls all from the comfort of his modest Michigan home. His spirit remained alive despite his physical deterioration because of the mission he had taken on. According to those closest to him, he maintained a bright outlook and an abundance of compassion even during his darkest hours. Fans of Bewitched will recognize him even if his voice has become softer but no less genuine. There was always a glimmer of optimism that he and Montgomery may mend their relationship. That there was still a slim chance, that they could get back together before time ran out. After a long battle with emphysema, Dick York passed away on February 20, 1992. His age was 63. He passed away while held by his wife, away from the glamour of Hollywood, his former stardom, and the woman with whom he had shared his most famous part. However, he never displayed any signs of animosity throughout those last days. York departed in silence, but Elizabeth Montgomery's stillness persisted until the unanticipated end of her own life. Something about Elizabeth Montgomery's mood altered, albeit her career continued to grow after Dick York's departure. She continued to be a famous face, captivating audiences on film, but she became more reserved whenever the subject of Bewitched came up. She discussed her time on the show in interviews for a long period, but she never once named York. Never in a daze, never while thinking about it, and never under any circumstances. It appeared like a purposeful omission to those on the outside. The fact that York remained silent baffled viewers who remembered how integral she had formerly been to the plot of the show. After sharing so much on-screen time, humor, and trust, what could have caused such a deep rift between the two actors? Some thought her silence on the subject of York stemmed from remorse, that she may have felt bad about how suddenly he had been replaced. Or how inadequate the care he received as his condition deteriorated. Some thought it stemmed from animosity, that she held him responsible for set disruptions, missing shoot days, and the show's production flow problems. Others insisted it was something much more private, the kind of thing that never appeared in tabloids or behind-the-scenes documentaries. Rumors circulated amongst those in the know that Montgomery was torn. They said that she admired York but felt helpless to ease his suffering. Said her initial efforts were to demonstrate compassion and patience. As a means of protecting herself from the increasing pressures in her own life, particularly in her complicated marriage to William Asher, she detached herself. Ultimately, Asher served as more than simply her spouse, he was also her employer. No one seems to have seen how much his annoyance with York affected her. Montgomery may have also just wanted to avoid dealing with the low points of her career. Even in her last years, she maintained an infamously low profile. Instead of discussing conflicts, she mostly talked about her family, her humanitarian work, and the series' legacy. Still, why she stayed completely silent about York was a mystery. Many people were wondering whether Montgomery would finally speak out when she became sick in the mid-1990s, maybe to reflect on her relationship with the man who had helped bring Bewitched to life or to pay honor to him. Next to her, although she was never one to do so, Elizabeth Montgomery died of colon cancer on May 18, 1995. Her age was a mere 62 years. The same measured stillness that had accompanied her since Dick York's departure from the show continued in her last interviews. There was no mention of him, no reconciliation, and no last remarks. That kind of stillness begs the question but never provides an answer. What lingers, though, is not merely silence but the crushing burden of unspoken meaning.